Padre Pio once spent an entire night on his knees, begging heaven for mercy on a family from San Giovanni Rotondo. What he witnessed that night would forever change him. The soul of a departed loved one appeared to him, his face twisted in agony, revealing something no one dares to tell you. Every time your family argues, every scream, every hurtful word, every icy silence inflicts indescribable suffering on the soul of your deceased loved one. And the worst part of all is that you don't even know it. You might believe that the dead no longer see this world. You probably think their suffering ended with their last breath. But what Padre Pio discovered that night in 1957 shattered everything the Church publicly taught about the souls in purgatory. Tonight, I'm going to reveal exactly what the souls of your departed loved ones feel when you have a family feud. And more importantly, I'm going to teach you the reconciliation ritual that Padre Pio practiced precisely at 3 o'clock, a ritual so powerful that the Vatican refused to make it public for decades. But be warned, what you are about to hear might make you uncomfortable. Perhaps you'll even recognize yourself in some of these situations. And that's exactly why you need to stay until the end, because the soul of someone you love might have been waiting for this ritual for years. It all began on March 14, 1957. A woman from the village, Emily Harrison, who was not related to Padre Pio despite sharing a last name, came to him at the confessional. She was weeping, not because of her own sins, but because, since the death of her husband Joseph 3 years earlier, her family had been torn apart. Her 4 children were no longer speaking to each other. The inheritance, the accumulated grudges, the old wounds that never healed, had transformed what was once a united family into a permanent battleground. Every family gathering ended in shouting. Every attempt at reconciliation failed. Emily thought Padre Pio would give her a typical penance, a few rosaries, maybe a Stations of the Cross, but what he told her froze her to the bone. Joseph sees you, Emily, and every argument between your children tortures him more than the flames of purgatory. She didn't understand immediately. How could her husband still see what was happening on earth when he had been dead for 3 years? Padre Pio then explained something that the Church keeps carefully guarded in its most secret archives. The souls in purgatory are not cut off from those they loved. On the contrary, they see everything, they hear everything, but they can do nothing. Imagine being tied up, gagged, unable to move, forced to watch your children destroy each other without being able to intervene. That's exactly what Joseph has been experiencing for 3 years. Padre Pio had received this terrible gift of perceiving the sufferings of souls. His stigmata weren't his only cross. He also bore the burden of physically feeling what the departed endured. And that night of March 14th, 1957, he decided to do something unusual. He asked Emily to gather her entire family the next day at precisely 3 o'clock in the small chapel of San Giovanni Rotondo. Not in the main church where pilgrims flocked by the thousands. No. In a small side chapel that few people knew about. Why 3 o'clock? Padre Pio didn't explain it at the time, but we know today that it's the exact hour when Christ breathed his last on the cross, the hour of divine mercy, the hour when the veil between the living and the dead becomes the thinnest. Emily obeyed. It wasn't easy. Convincing her 4 children to be in the same room was already a miracle. But Padre Pio's name had a power that no one dared to challenge in San Giovanni Rotondo. The next day, at 2:50 p.m., the 4 Harrison children were seated in the chapel. Mark, the eldest, a hardened man who hadn't shed a tear at his father's funeral. Lucy, the youngest, who accused Mark of stealing the inheritance. Peter and John, the twins, who had chosen opposite sides and hadn't spoken to each other in 2 years. Emily was there too, trembling, not knowing what was about to happen. At precisely 3 o'clock, Padre Pio entered. But something was different. Those who had seen him celebrate Mass thousands of times immediately noticed that his face was disturbingly pale. His stigmata were bleeding more profusely than usual, and his eyes, usually filled with compassion, seemed to be looking beyond the walls of the chapel. He stopped in the center of the room and simply said these words, "Joseph is here." Lucy burst out laughing nervously. Mark clenched his fists. The twins exchanged a skeptical glance. But Emily, she fell to her knees. She knew that Padre Pio never lied. What happened next was recorded in the Vatican's private archives to which very few people have access. But in 2014, during the canonization of Padre Pio, some of these documents were briefly consulted by researchers, and what they found surpassed anything they could have imagined. Padre Pio began to speak, but his voice had changed. It was no longer the deep, reassuring tone of the Capuchin monk. It was a younger, gentler voice, with the distinct accent of farmers from Puglia. "Mark, my son, do you remember the day I taught you how to prune the vines? You were 8 years old. You cut your finger and cried. I told you that men don't cry. I was wrong. Cry, Mark. Cry for everything you've kept locked up inside." Mark turned white as a sheet. No one other than he and his father knew that story. He had never told anyone, not even his mother. Padre Pio continued, turning to each of the children in turn. He revealed family secrets that only Joseph could know. Intimate moments, private conversations, promises made on his deathbed. But that wasn't the most unsettling part. The most unsettling part came when Padre Pio described what Joseph had experienced since his death. 3 years. 3 long years of watching you tear each other apart. Every insult you hurl at each other burns me like fire. Every door you slam echoes throughout purgatory. Every time one of you refuses to forgive, my chains tighten. The Harrison children were now all in tears. Even Mark, who hadn't cried in decades, had tears streaming down his face. Padre Pio then returned to his normal voice and explained something that no one had ever dared to say publicly. The souls in purgatory are purified by the fire of divine love. But this purification can be either accelerated or slowed down by the actions of those still living, and nothing, absolutely nothing, slows down the liberation of a soul more than the unresolved conflicts of those they left behind. Why is this the case? Because the soul feels responsible. It tells itself that if it had been a better parent, a better spouse, a better friend, these family feuds wouldn't exist. It carries the guilt for disputes in which it no longer even participates. It's a form of torture that Dante himself didn't describe in his Divine Comedy, a torture all the more cruel because it's self-inflicted, by the love that the soul still bears for the living. But Padre Pio hadn't come only to reveal this terrible truth. He came to offer a remedy, a ritual that Capuchin monks had practiced since the 13th century, but which had gradually been abandoned. Before I teach it to you, let me explain why this ritual works and why it must be performed at 3 o'clock, the Divine Mercy Hour. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Christ died on the cross. At that exact instant, the veil of the temple was torn in two. The separation between heaven and earth was momentarily abolished, and every day, at that exact hour, that tear reopens slightly. Mystics have always known this. Saint Faustina spoke of it in her diary. Saint Teresa of Avila chose this hour for her most intense prayers, and Padre Pio always celebrated his Mass so that the consecration would fall exactly at 3 o'clock. It's the hour when your prayers have the most power. It's the hour when souls in purgatory can most easily receive your help. And it's the hour when the ritual of reconciliation reaches its maximum effectiveness. But there's an absolute condition. The ritual only works if you sincerely intend to forgive, not to pretend, not to say the words without meaning them, but to truly let go of the grudges that poison your heart. Padre Pio was uncompromising on this point. He refused to administer this ritual to those who weren't ready, because a ritual done without sincerity is worse than no ritual at all. It gives the soul a false hope. That hurts it even more deeply. Let's return to what happened in the chapel that day. Padre Pio asked the 4 Harrison children, to stand up and face each other, two by two, Mark facing Lucy, Peter facing John. He then asked them to hold hands. The resistance was immediate. Mark refused to touch Lucy. He said that she had betrayed him, that she had told lies about him to the whole town. Lucy retorted that Mark had falsified their father's will to appropriate the family home. Padre Pio said nothing. He simply waited. And suddenly, his stigmata began to bleed abundantly. The blood flowed onto the chapel floor forming a small red pool. Emily gasped. The children froze. No one had ever seen Padre Pio's stigmata bleed so much outside of Mass. "It's your father who suffers," said Padre Pio, in a barely audible voice. "Every second you refuse to forgive each other is a drop of his blood that flows." That image was too powerful for Mark. He who hadn't touched his sister in 2 years suddenly took her hands, and at that instant, something extraordinary happened. An odor of roses filled the chapel. Those who know the life of Padre Pio know that this scent of roses was the sign of his mystical presence, even when he was physically absent. But this time, the scent didn't come from him, it came from elsewhere. "Joseph is pleased," murmured Padre Pio, smiling for the first time since the beginning of the ceremony. The ritual itself could now begin, and what Padre Pio taught that day to the Harrison family. "I'm going to pass on to you now, word for word, gesture by gesture. But before that, I must warn you about something important. This ritual will stir things up in you, memories that you thought you had buried, emotions that you've spent years repressing, truths that you may not be ready to face if you currently have a family feud, an unresolved conflict, a wound that has never healed. Know that the soul of your deceased loved one is probably suffering at this very moment. And if you yourself can have lost someone without having had time to reconcile, to ask forgiveness, or to forgive, know that it's not too late. The ritual I'm going to teach you can repair bonds that seem definitively broken. Padre Pio proved this hundreds of times during his life. Families torn apart for generations found peace thanks to this practice. Souls tortured for decades were finally able to leave purgatory. But there's a price to pay, and that price is your pride. Calm yourself for a moment and ask yourself this question sincerely. Is there someone in your family that you refuse to forgive? Is there someone to whom you haven't asked forgiveness, even though you know you should have? If the answer is yes, the soul of one of your deceased loved ones may be suffering at this moment because of you. This is not an accusation. It's simply a spiritual reality that Padre Pio spent his life documenting. Now, let me tell you what happened after the Harrison family's ritual, because what happened in the following weeks was even more extraordinary than the ceremony itself. Mark and Lucy reconciled that day. They cried together, asked each other for forgiveness, and decided to share equally the inheritance that their father had left. The twins did the same. But 3 weeks later, something unexpected happened. Emily, the mother, had a dream so vivid that she thought she was awake. Joseph, her husband, appeared to her, not as he was on his deathbed, emaciated and suffering, but as he was on their wedding day, young and radiant. He simply said these words to her, "I'm free now. Thank you." When she told this dream to Padre Pio, he smiled and told her that it wasn't a dream. Joseph had been freed from purgatory. The reconciliation of his children had broken the chains that held him. This testimony was recorded by 3 independent witnesses and is now found in the archives of Padre Pio's canonization process. This is just one of the hundreds of documented cases where family reconciliation has directly led to the liberation of a soul. But why do family feuds affect souls in purgatory so profoundly? It's a question that many theologians have pondered, and Padre Pio's answer was both simple and profound. Love never dies. When someone truly loves you, that love doesn't vanish with their last heartbeat. It continues, it persists, it observes. And when you love someone, their suffering becomes your own, even after death, especially after death, because the soul, freed from the body's distractions, feels everything with tenfold intensity. Imagine a parent who spent their entire life trying to maintain the unity of their family. They made sacrifices. They relinquished their own desires. They exhausted themselves trying to mend conflicts between their children. And then they die. And just a few months later, everything they worked for crumbles. Their children tear each other apart. Their grandchildren take sides. The family they built with so much love disintegrates. How can you expect their soul to find peace in those conditions? Padre Pio said it was one of the most terrible sufferings in purgatory, worse than the purifying fire, worse than the anticipation of seeing God face to face, the pain of seeing those they love hurt each other. And the worst part is, the living don't even realize it. They're so consumed by their own grudges that they forget someone is watching them from beyond, someone who would give anything to intervene, but can't. That's why the ritual of reconciliation is so important. It's not just about making peace among the living. It's about liberating the dead. Now, I'm going to teach you the ritual, exactly as Padre Pio passed it on. But first, let me tell you about another case. That shows just how severe the consequences of family feuds can be. In 1961, a woman from Naples named Teresa came to see Padre Pio. She was desperate. Her mother had died 10 years earlier, and ever since. Teresa had been tormented by recurring nightmares. In these nightmares, her mother would appear to her, her face contorted in suffering, always repeating the same phrase, "Reconcile with your sister." Teresa and her sister Rosa hadn't spoken since their mother's death. A dispute over family heirlooms had escalated, and they had vowed to never speak to each other again. For 10 years, Teresa had ignored these nightmares. She attributed them to guilt, to stress, to her imagination. But the dreams were becoming more frequent and more terrifying. When she told Padre Pio all of this, he closed his eyes for a long moment. Then he opened them and said something that sent chills down her spine. "Your mother is not yet in purgatory. She is in a worse state. She is stuck." Teresa didn't understand. How could her mother be stuck? Stuck where? Padre Pio explained that there was an intermediary state, rarely mentioned by the Church, where certain souls remained prisoners, when their earthly affairs were unresolved. These souls could neither advance toward purgatory nor return among the living. They were suspended in a limbo of suffering, and the main cause of this state, according to Padre Pio, was precisely unresolved family conflicts. Teresa's mother had spent her final years trying to reconcile her two daughters. She had failed, and now, even in death, she was unable to let go. She remained attached to this conflict, as if an invisible chain prevented her from rising. Teresa wept for hours. In Padre Pio's confessional, she finally understood that her nightmares weren't just dreams. They were cries for help from her mother. Padre Pio gave her a precise instruction. She had to find her sister, Rosa, and perform the ritual of reconciliation with her. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. Teresa took the first train back to Naples. She went straight to her sister's house, a sister she hadn't seen in 10 years. Rosa initially refused to open the door. Then, when Teresa told her that Padre Pio had sent her, she hesitated. Padre Pio's name had that power over people, even those who doubted religion, hesitated to ignore his instructions. Rosa finally opened the door, and what happened next was reported in a letter that Teresa sent to Padre Pio. A few weeks later, the two sisters performed the ritual together. They held hands, asked each other for forgiveness, and recited the prayers that Padre Pio had prescribed. It wasn't easy. There were tears, cries, accusations that resurfaced. 10 years of resentment don't vanish in a few minutes, but they persevered. And in the end, Something happened. Rosa suddenly felt a hand placed on her shoulder. She turned around. There was no one there. Teresa felt the same thing at the same moment. A hand on her shoulder, warm, reassuring, like their mother's hand when they were children. And then, a scent of lavender filled the room. It was their mother's favorite perfume, a perfume they hadn't smelled in 10 years. The two sisters knew then that their mother was present, and that she was finally liberated. That night, Teresa had one last dream. Her mother appeared to her one last time. But this time, her face was no longer contorted by suffering. It was peaceful, luminous. She simply said, "Thank you," and disappeared. Teresa never had that nightmare again. This testimony is one of many documented cases where Padre Pio's reconciliation ritual has had visible and measurable effects, not vague or subjective effects, but effects that several people could observe simultaneously. But why is this ritual so effective? And why has the Church never officially taught it? The answer to the first question is theological. The answer to the second is political. Let's start with theology. Forgiveness is at the heart of Christian teaching. Christ himself said that, "If you do not forgive others their sins, your heavenly Father will not forgive yours either." It's a serious warning that most Christians prefer to ignore. But forgiveness among the living is only part of the equation. There is also forgiveness between the living and the dead, a forgiveness rarely mentioned because it seems impossible. How can you forgive someone who is no longer there to receive your forgiveness? How do you ask forgiveness from someone who can no longer answer you? That's where Padre Pio's ritual comes in. Creating a bridge between two worlds, it allows the living to transmit their forgiveness to the dead, and the dead to receive that forgiveness and pass it on in turn. It's a sacramental act in the deepest sense of the term, not an official sacrament like baptism or communion, but a sacramental, meaning an act blessed by the Church that produces real spiritual effects. Now, why hasn't the Church ever officially taught this ritual? The answer is complex and touches on issues of power and control that many would rather not address. The Catholic Church has always had an ambiguous relationship with mystical practices. On one hand, it recognizes the existence of saints, miracles, apparitions. On the other, it's wary of anything that might escape its control. Padre Pio's reconciliation ritual poses a delicate theological problem. It suggests that lay people can have a direct influence on souls in purgatory, without necessarily going through the official sacraments of the Church. That sincere family prayer can be as effective, or even more effective, than a mass said by a priest. That's a dangerous idea for an institution that has built its power on a monopoly of access to the divine. Padre Pio knew this. That's why he never sought to formalize this ritual. He transmitted it from person to person, from family to family, in the privacy of the confessional or private meetings. And that's how it was passed on to me, through an uninterrupted chain of witnesses that goes directly back to San Giovanni Rotondo. But before I teach it to you, I need to tell you about one last crucial element, an element that many omit out of ignorance, or fear of shocking you. The souls in purgatory are not passive. They can intervene in our lives. Padre Pio was convinced of this. He had seen too many cases where the deceased manifested themselves to ask for help, to warn of danger, or to thank someone for a prayer. And these interventions are particularly frequent in families where there are unresolved conflicts. Like a long-standing family feud, it's as if the soul, imprisoned by these conflicts, is desperately trying to attract the attention of those who could free it. Have you ever had the feeling that a deceased loved one was trying to communicate with you? A particularly vivid dream, a sensation of an inexplicable presence, an object that falls for no reason, a song that comes on the radio exactly when you were thinking about that person. These signs are not coincidences. They are calls. And if you are currently in conflict with someone in your family, these calls are probably pleas for you to make peace. I know all of this may seem strange. Maybe you're even wondering if what I'm saying is true, or if it's just superstition. Let me tell you one last story, a story that takes place in our time, and shows that these phenomena do not belong to the past. In 2019, a French woman named Michelle contacted a prayer group affiliated with San Giovanni Rotondo. She was in the middle of a divorce, and her family was divided. Her parents had died a few years earlier, and she was convinced that they were unhappy to see their grandchildren caught up in this conflict. Michelle wasn't particularly religious. She described herself as spiritual but not religious. But she was desperate, and when a friend told her about Padre Pio's reconciliation ritual, she decided to try it. She had no one with whom to do the ritual. Her ex-husband refused all contact. Her children were too young to understand, and she had no siblings. The prayer group explained to her that there was a variation of the ritual for people who are alone, a variation where one symbolically reconciles with the absent person by representing them with an empty chair or a photo. Michelle did the ritual alone, at home, at 3 o'clock, 3:00 p.m. sharp. She placed a photo of her ex-husband in front of her and recited the prescribed prayers. She cried a lot. She said aloud everything she had never dared to say to him. She asked him for forgiveness for her share of responsibility in the failure of their marriage, and she offered him her forgiveness for all the harm he had done to her. What happened next shocked her. That evening, as she was getting ready for bed, her phone rang. It was her ex-husband. They hadn't spoken in 6 months. He simply said this: "I don't know why, but I've been thinking about you all day. I felt I had to call you. I'm sorry for everything." Michelle couldn't believe her ears. She hadn't told him anything about the ritual. He had no way of knowing what she had done that afternoon. And yet, at the exact moment when she offered him her forgiveness, something had been transmitted. Was it the intervention of her deceased parents? Was it the mysterious effect of prayer? Was it simply an extraordinary coincidence? I leave it to each of you to answer according to your beliefs, but Michelle, for her part, has no doubt. The ritual worked, and her divorce, which promised to be brutal and devastating, was finally settled amicably. Now, it's time to teach you the ritual. Listen carefully, because each step is important. Padre Pio's ritual of reconciliation is broken down into 5 phases. Each phase must be completed in order and with sincerity. Phase 1. The preparation. Choose a time when you will not be disturbed. Ideally, start the ritual at 2:45 p.m. so that the central phase falls exactly at 3 o'clock, 3:00 p.m. Prepare the space. A lit white candle representing the light of Christ. A picture or photo of the deceased person whose soul you want to liberate, if possible. A small container of holy water. If you are doing the ritual with the person with whom you are in conflict, sit face to face. If you are alone, place an empty chair in front of you representing that person. Take 3 deep breaths. Calm your mind. Put aside your everyday worries. Phase 2. The invocation. Make the sign of the cross and say these words aloud. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Lord Jesus Christ, who at the 3 o'clock prayer hour gave up your spirit for the salvation of the world, open at this moment the gates of your mercy. Padre Pio, faithful servant of suffering souls, intercede for us with the Father. May this hour of grace be an hour of reconciliation and liberation. Pause. Feel the divine presence that surrounds you. Phase 3. The mutual confession. This is the most difficult phase. It's also the most important. If you're with the person you're feuding with, take their hands and look them in the eyes. Each of you, in turn, speak aloud about what has hurt you. Do this without accusations, without judgments. Simply state the facts and your emotions. For example, when you said that to our mother on her deathbed, I felt betrayed. The pain was so intense that I decided I could never trust you again. Listen to the other person without interrupting. Don't try to justify yourself. Accept their truth, just as they accept yours. Then, each of you, In turn, ask for forgiveness, not for what you think you didn't do, but for your part of the responsibility in the conflict. For example, I ask you to forgive me for holding on to this grudge for so long. I ask you to forgive me for all the times I could have reached out, but chose to remain in my anger. If you're alone, say these same things to an empty chair or to a photograph. Those it may seem strange, but the spiritual effect is the same. Phase 4, the offering for the souls. This phase is what releases the soul of the deceased. Join your hands in prayer and say these words. Merciful Lord, we offer you this reconciliation for the soul of our father, our mother, our loved one. Of course, say the name of the deceased person. May every word of forgiveness spoken today be a balm on their sufferings. May every grudge abandoned break a chain that holds them back. We ask you, through the intercession of Padre Pio and the Most Holy Virgin Mary, to hasten their purification and to welcome them into your eternal light. Then recite 3 Our Fathers, 3 Hail Marys, and 3 Glory be to the Fathers for the soul of the deceased. Phase 5. The sealing. This final phase ensures that the reconciliation will be lasting. Take holy water, if you have some, and make the sign of the cross on your forehead and on the forehead of the other person, or on the empty chair. First, say these final words. By this holy water, we seal our reconciliation in the blood of Christ. May nothing, and no one, be able to undo what God has united today. May the peace we have found be an eternal peace, and may the soul for whom we have prayed finally find rest in Amen. Extinguish the candle. The ritual is complete. But your work doesn't end there. Padre Pio insisted on a crucial point. The ritual is only a beginning. If you fall back into the same patterns of conflict, if you allow resentment to take root again, the soul will suffer again. Reconciliation is not an event. It's a process. It's a daily commitment. To choose forgiveness over anger, compassion over judgment, love over indifference. Padre Pio recommended repeating the ritual once a year, on the anniversary of the death of the departed loved one. Not because the first ritual didn't work, but because forgiveness needs to be renewed, like a plant needs to be watered. Now, you might have doubts. You might be wondering if all of this is just superstition, if the souls of the dead can really see us and suffer from our family feuds. I understand those doubts. I had them myself, before seeing the effects of the ritual with my own eyes. But let me ask you a question. What do you have to lose? If the ritual works, you'll free the soul of a loved one, and you'll find peace in your family relationships. If the ritual doesn't work, at worst, you'll have spent an hour reflecting on your relationships, forgiving, and asking for forgiveness. That's never time wasted. Padre Pio often said that doubt is the last refuge of pride. We prefer to doubt, rather than risk being wrong. We prefer to remain in our comfortable certainty, rather than open ourselves to the possibility of the supernatural. But the souls of our loved ones don't have the luxury of our skepticism. They wait, they suffer, they hope. And every day that you spend in conflict with a member of your family is one more day that they endure a pain that you can't even imagine. I know these words are hard to hear, but Padre Pio was not a man of gentle words. He spoke the truth, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt, because the truth that hurts is often the one that heals the deepest. So now, I leave you with this question. What are you going to do with what you've learned today? Are you going to continue as before, ignoring the silent pleas of your deceased loved ones? Are you going to let pride and resentment dominate your family relationships? Or are you going to find the courage to take the first step, to reach out to that person with whom you've been feuding for too long, to do the reconciliation ritual at 3 o'clock during the Divine Mercy Hour? The choice is yours. But know that somewhere, on the other side of the veil, someone you have loved is waiting for your decision. someone who held you in their arms when you were a child, someone who watched over you during your feverish nights, someone who prayed for you, even when you had forgotten them. That person sees you at this very moment. They hear your thoughts. They feel your emotions, and they hope, with all their being, that you will choose forgiveness. Padre Pio spent the last years of his life repeating a simple message to all those who came to see him. Reconcile. Reconcile before it's too late. For time passes quickly, and death comes when we least expect it. Don't let your loved ones depart without having made peace with them, and don't let those who have already left suffer eternally from your unresolved conflicts. This message is more relevant today than it has ever been. In a world where families are torn apart over inheritances, political opinions, different life choices, in a world where it is so easy to cut ties and block someone on social media, in a world where forgiveness is seen as a weakness, the words of Padre Pio resonate like a prophetic call. Reconcile. Not tomorrow, not when you have time, not when the other person has taken the first step. Now. Because with every passing second, somewhere in purgatory, a soul suffers from our earthly quarrels, and that soul could be that of someone you have loved more than anything in the world. You now know what the souls of your departed loved ones feel when you argue. You have the ritual to free them. What happens next is entirely up to you. I've shared secrets with you that Padre Pio transmitted at the peril of his reputation. Truth that the Vatican prefers to keep in the shadows. Practices that can truly change the destiny of a soul if what you've discovered today has touched you, if you felt your heart open, even for a moment. Then this video has achieved its purpose. But there's one thing I ask of you, not for me, but for the souls who suffer in silence. If you know someone, a friend, a family member, someone online, who's in a family feud, share this video with them. Don't keep these teachings to yourself, because every family reconciled is a soul freed. The super thanks button below this video isn't just a simple way to offer financial support. It's a way of saying that these hidden truths deserve to be revealed, that the work of transmitting Padre Pio's teachings must continue, that the souls in purgatory are counting on us to help them. Each contribution allows us to create new content, to reach more families, to free more souls. You aren't giving for me, you're giving for them. And if you can't give financially, a simple share, a comment, a prayer, has the same value in the eyes of heaven. Padre Pio used to say that the prayer of a poor person is worth more than the gold of a rich person, if it comes from the heart. Now, I'd like to hear from you. Do you have an unresolved family feud that weighs on you? Have you done the ritual and noticed any effects, or simply, are you ready to forgive someone today? Write it in the comments, not for me, but for yourself, because putting words to an intention makes it more powerful. And who knows, maybe someone on the other side will read your comment and finally find peace. May Padre Pio intercede for you and for all those you love, living and dead. May the peace of Christ be with you, and may the souls of your loved ones finally find eternal rest. Amen.